The Blackhawks let a second sound win in a row slip out of their grasp while Kevin Korchinski gets healthy scratched.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one sports podcasting network, where we bring you your team every day. On today's episode, I'll dive into the Blackhawks' frustrating overtime loss to the Jets, where they surrendered the game-tying goal in the final minute of regulation. Then I'll share, in my opinion, why it's completely unacceptable to be handling Kevin Korchinski the way that the team is. And then in segment 3, I'll get into the latest news and updates on all of the Blackhawks trade chips. But before I get into that, just got to let you all know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NCAA tournament is now right around the corner. We're officially in March, and FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. Go and head on over to FanDuel.com right now in order to get started. All right, happy Wednesday, everyone. We are now less than 48 hours away from the 2026 NHL trade deadline. As of the time of this recording, it is 5:01 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday afternoon. Connor Murphy is still the only member of the Blackhawks to have been traded up to this point, but I do expect at the very least one more move is going to be coming in the next 2 days. But before I break down some of the latest news that we're hearing regarding Jason Dickinson, Ilya Mikheyev, Nick Foligno, and Matt Grzelcyk, and if you specifically clicked on today's episode to hear about that, you can easily jump to segment 3 as I time code everything down in the description. That's something that I do on every single episode of Locked On Blackhawks. But opening things up here on today's show, definitely got to start with what transpired last night up in Winnipeg. My, oh my, such a disappointing finish. The Blackhawks allowed the game-tying goal with just 36.8 seconds left in regulation, and then wind up falling 3-2 in overtime as Mark Scheifele nets the game-winning goal for his third point of the game. And it's a real shame how this one ended, because through the opening 45 minutes or so, I thought it was a pretty darn good game from this young group. They had a real good opportunity to finish off this 4-game road trip out of the Olympic break, which certainly didn't start all that great, but had a chance to close it out real strong and return to Chicago with some momentum in their back pocket. And it was especially sharp of a first 2 periods, considering this was the first game of the season in which Connor Murphy was not in the lineup. And while the Jets, offense isn't necessarily known for its potency this season, especially as of late, it was still a big test on the road for this young blue line, considering 5 of the 6 defensemen that dressed last night were 24 years old or younger. And considering that, and considering they were without their defensive anchor in Connor Murphy for the first time, I thought they held up pretty well. And a lot of those young guys who got leaned on a little bit more and had to take on some extra minutes without Connor Murphy being there, like Alex Vlasic played a season-high 25 minutes and 47 seconds last night. Sam Rinzel, I believe, clocked his 6th most time on ice of the season. Louis Crevier, his 7th most. I thought, a lot of those guys had really strong moments or significant stretches throughout the course of this game and held up pretty well. And in the first 2 periods, Winnipeg only recorded 8 scoring chances in all situations and were credited with just 1 high danger chance at even strength. Now, the score was still tied 1-1 going into that second intermission, but the Blackhawks were certainly playing the better hockey between the two sides. The score was even up still just because Connor Hellebuck was having a gold medal-esque style performance in between the pipes, because, of course, he always plays that way against the Blackhawks for whatever reason. But in that second period, the Blackhawks really were taking control, even though they weren't able to gain the lead in those first 40 minutes. And it was the top line in particular who was really dangerous in that middle frame. And Connor Bedard alone had like 3 or 4 real golden opportunities. Ryan Green was making some excellent passes to set him up. And then finally, in the opening minute of the third period, the top line breaks through. Connor Bedard with a nice little slip feed to find Ryan Green with some space. And then probably the nastiest shot that we've seen from Ryan Green so far is an NHLer, bar Mexico, right up off the back bar and out. Bounced out of the net as fast as it went in. That gave the Blackhawks a 2-1 lead. Green with his 8th goal of the season. I feel like he's been pretty darn sharp, especially compared to Andre Burakovsky, who I think he's getting a little bit better, but it's still not resulting in any production. And it's pretty clear that he's lacking confidence when the puck is on his stick right now. But altogether, it's been a sound first 4 games back for Ryan Green out of the Olympic break. And for a guy who I really expected to spend a majority, if not all of this season down in the AHL with the Rockford Ice Hogs, I've been really impressed and also pleasantly surprised with how he's been able to fare on that top line and produce offensively. Not that he's been like a consistent point producer alongside Bedard, but still altogether, I never expected him to be in that situation in the first place. And he's definitely done a better job over the last month or two compared to Andre Burakovsky. But after that, after Ryan Green gave the Blackhawks their first lead of the game, the Hawks, in my opinion, stopped doing what made them so successful up to that point. They stopped being the aggressors out there. And I just thought altogether they were far too passive in those final 15 minutes of regulation. And that's when Winnipeg started getting scoring chance after scoring chance. And something that really kind of frustrated me, and I know this is something that Blashill has talked about in the past, that he would like his guys to do more. He doesn't mind when his guys ice the puck as opposed to maybe throwing a pass that could lead to a turnover in the defensive zone. And his reasoning for that is he feels like bad things happen more often when you're kind of in scramble mode off of a turnover as opposed to off of a defensive zone faceoff where you still have a chance to go and win that draw. However, I do feel like the Blackhawks, they had opportunities to break the puck out or at least not throw it all the way down to the ice. Just get those clears down to center and force the Jets to go and regroup at center ice. I thought they cleared it all the way down and just took too many icings altogether last night, and they just kind of turtled up when that style of hockey, especially when you're not really a sharp defensive team, especially when your veteran anchor was just traded a couple of days ago, that winds up being a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly what transpired for the Blackhawks in that final 15 minutes of regulation. In the third period alone, remember, I just said the Blackhawks held the Jets to only 8 scoring chances in all situations through the first 2 periods. They were credited with 17 in the third period, while the Blackhawks only had 2. As I said, they turtled up. They stopped being the aggressors. They were far too passive, and it felt like they were just trying to bleed the clock and win this game 2-1 or maybe 3-1 with an empty netter. And fittingly, the Jets tied the game up with 36.8 seconds to go off of one of those icings, and it was former Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews, still one of the best in the business at the faceoff dot, despite being away from the game for the last couple of years, wins that offensive zone drawback. It winds up working over to Cole Perfetti at the left circle and then fired a shot with some traffic out in front of Spencer Knight. Both goals that the Jets scored in regulation, I did think were kind of softies that Knight led up, but at the same point in time, I don't blame him whatsoever for this loss because the Blackhawks had the Jets, I feel like, right where they wanted them to. They just didn't go and close out the job. So really frustrating to see, such a solid 2.25, 2.5 periods go to waste last night. And this was the 9th time this season. Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times posted this on X last night. It's the 9th time this year in which the Hawks have allowed the game-tying or go-ahead goal in the last 4 minutes of the third period this season, and they've only won one of those games. And I mean, that's, 8 or 16 potential points right there that makes all the difference in the world in the standings and is preventing the Blackhawks from still having somewhat of a chance of being of contending for a Stanley Cup playoff spot. Those are the things that make a difference. And it's pretty clear that this young group is still, unsurprisingly, having trouble closing, not going to get any easier now that Connor Murphy is no longer in the picture, but very disappointing with the way that last night's game ended. There were obviously lots of positives to take away from those first 2 periods in particular, but at the end of the day, and while I know some Blackhawks fans don't want this team to win down the stretch of the season because losses only increase their odds of coming away with a better draft pick in 2026 this summer, I understand that completely, but I still feel like a win would have given this young group so much confidence, again, in their first game without Connor Murphy, wrapping up their 4-game road trip out of the break with 2 wins in a row, coming back home for their first game after the Olympics against a Vancouver Canucks team that's selling pieces off left and right. Would have been a real good opportunity for 3 in a row. Instead, winds up being a painful loss and probably wound up being, in my opinion, I'd have to imagine a pretty quiet plane ride back home to Chicago last night with the way that one ended. All right, that takes care of my quick thoughts on the Blackhawks. Frustrating and painful 3-2 overtime loss to Jonathan Toews and the Jets. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into my thoughts on the Kevin Korchinski situation as he was healthy scratched last night in favor of the newly recalled Ethan Del Mastro. But first, got to give a shout out to today's sponsor here on Locked On Blackhawks, which is FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, and momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now, FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into an even bigger potential win with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay that you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits your read. And you can also mix spreads, totals, and player props to match exactly how you see the slate playing out. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team that you've been following all season. It's your parlay in your style now with even more upside behind it. So head on over to FanDuel.com right now in order to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. You can now join the Locked On Blackhawks Everydayer Club to get ad-free audio, access to our group chat on Discord, and much more. Just go and use the code DEADLINE ahead of the trade deadline on Friday. You got 2 more days to take advantage of this offer. If you type in the code DEADLINE, you'll get 1 month for entirely free. And you can easily find the link down in the description to sign up for the Locked On Blackhawks Everydayer Club right now. Segment 2. Does anyone remember what I said on yesterday's show when I was previewing the matchup with the Winnipeg Jets? During segment 3, as I was breaking down the Hawks' projected lineup for the matchup, I checked my phone, which I'm very grateful that I did, and noticed that Ethan Del Mastro was recalled from the Rockford Ice Hogs. Now, Sam Rinzel did miss each of the last 2 games due to an illness, and there was a spot open up on the roster for a 7th defenseman again because Connor Murphy had gotten traded. But I specifically said on yesterday's episode that if Sam Rinzel is healthy and both he and Ethan Del Mastro play while Kevin Korchinski does not, I am going to lose it. And of course, that's what ended up happening, Blackhawks fans, is Ethan Del Mastro, despite not being on the ice for the morning skate, still drew into the lineup over Korchinski on the third pairing with Rinzel. And to be fair, to give a devil's advocate side of the argument here, I do get why Jeff Blashill did this, because without Murphy in the picture and with Wyatt Kaiser still on injured reserve with that lower body injury, the only real defensive defenseman and also true penalty killers that was left on the roster was Alex Vlasic and Louis Crevier. And also, one thing that's worth pointing out, Gail Kalchuk actually mentioned this on X yesterday, and I was glad that she did. Rinzel and Del Mastro played a pretty good amount with one another down with the Ice Hogs when Rinzel had that just about a 2-month stint down in the minor leagues. Also, of course, was playing with the Ice Hogs as he was eligible to get sent down to the AHL during the Olympic break. So those two were very familiar with one another. So it does make sense that those guys as a natural pairing, with Del Mastro being more so of a defensive-minded, stay-at-home defenseman compared to Korchinski, who's a puck-mover, offensive-minded defenseman. When you have Artem Levshinov and Sam Rinzel in the lineup, like I understand why Jeff Blashill went that route. However, they just completely continue to bamboozle Kevin Korchinski, in my opinion. And it's pretty clear that there's like a lack of trust between Jeff Blashill and Kevin Korchinski. And I know I've seen some people in the comment section, I've seen some people say it on social media, that Korchinski isn't giving Blashill and this coaching staff a reason for them to trust him. But I also feel like they're not putting him in opportunities to really prove himself. Like, the opportunities that Kevin Korchinski is getting isn't really much of an opportunity whatsoever. Like, he's played 4 NHL games with the Blackhawks this season, and all 4 of them, he's never played more than 14 minutes and 4 seconds of ice time. He's mostly been thrown down on the third pairing along with Connor Murphy, who they like to play in defensive situations. And they're also not giving Korchinski any time on the power play. That's still going to Sam Rinzel and Artem Levshinov. And altogether, since the Blackhawks rushed Korchinski on the scene, which we have to remember, they made the wrong decision with that as well. They rushed him up to the NHL as a 19-year-old, made him play in, I believe, 78 games, wasn't eligible to play with the Ice Hogs in 2022-2023. Ever since then, he's only appeared in 20 NHL contests to really show the growth and the strides that he's made in his development. I just feel like over the last 2 years, they haven't given Korchinski a fair shot whatsoever. And I do understand. I'm not ignorant to the fact that with each passing day that goes by, the likelihood of Kevin Korchinski being a puzzle piece here in the Blackhawks rebuild, it decreases pretty significantly. But I still feel like altogether we have an idea of what Kevin Korchinski is, but we don't truly know what he is because we're not giving him a large enough sample size to go and prove it. We're not putting him in opportunities where he's going to find success. And the frustrating part to me about that is we can shelter Sam Rinzel like we were doing earlier in the season when he was going through some of the struggles and before they sent him down to the AHL. We were sheltering Artem Levshinov earlier on in the season. Haven't really been able to do that as much since Connor Bedard got hurt in early December, and Blashill has just kind of steered away from the 7 defenseman method, which I do wonder if he wants to go back to that. However, as I broke down on the show, I don't think the Blackhawks forward group, considering down the stretch of the season, you're going to see more young players like Anton Frondel, Sasha Boisvert, maybe even Nick Lardis. You're going to have more kids that you want to give opportunities to. How are you only going to be dressing 11 forwards? And that's what you have to do if you want to play all 7. So it's just frustrating to me that it feels like Kevin Korchinski isn't getting like the same amount of grace that Artem Levshinov or Sam Rinzel have gotten, who, by the way, neither of them have like been flawless as a rookie so far here this season. And Sam Rinzel is the same age as Kevin Korchinski is, right? So I just don't understand why the usage and why Blashill is so inclined to not give Korchinski a real opportunity. To me, it's ridiculous. And if you're like, if they envisioned that it was going to be a problem to give Kevin Korchinski NHL ice time this year, why did you keep him? And if you can't give him an opportunity when Connor Murphy is traded and Wyatt Kaiser is injured, what's the path for Kevin Korchinski to play? How is he supposed to get more opportunities down the stretch when Kaiser could potentially return on Friday? And I feel like Matt Grzelcyk probably isn't going to get traded. Not to bury the lead of what I'm about to go and get into here in segment 3, but if it's like a situation where, oh, well, we can feel more comfortable playing Korchinski on the third pairing because when we have Kaiser back, we have a second effective left-handed defenseman penalty killer, but still from a numbers perspective with Matt Grzelcyk, and again, I don't feel like they're going to trade him. I just don't see the path for Kevin Korchinski, and I don't understand as well, like, how he's supposed to be feeling confident, how he's supposed to be believing in his skill sets when his opportunities are few and far between, and he's getting healthy scratching when there are other players out there on the Blackhawks who are not living up to the expectations right now, and they're not really being held to that same standard. It's almost like the Ryan Green healthy scratching going into the Olympics. Like, I am not very happy with what the Blackhawks have done to this kid. I feel like they've done no favors to Korchinski whatsoever. And by the way, it's not like this is a true Lucas Reichel situation where, Korchinski wasn't a high-end draft pick of general manager Kyle Davidson. No, he was the first player that Kyle Davidson ever selected as the full-time general manager here in the Blackhawks. In my opinion, he's kind of failed him by rushing him to the NHL, by not, and I know that I'm not exactly sure how the decision-making process goes between the Blackhawks front office and the coaching staff. And if, Davidson is telling Jeff Blashill who to play and whatnot, but I just feel like altogether the front office has failed Kevin Korchinski ever since he's joined the professional level. And I'm not really happy with Jeff Blashill about this situation either, considering this was a guy who was, and listen, I was really singing Blashill's praises in that first quarter of the season, and I don't want to change my opinion on him just because of the way that the season has gone, especially his first season as the Blackhawks head coach. I do still feel like undoubtedly he's the best head coach of the Blackhawks have had since Joel Quenneville. However, he was handpicked to come here because of his familiarity with a rebuild in Detroit and also his previous developments. And he hasn't really developed the young players all that well throughout the course of the season. Now, I mean, Louis Crevier, he's been exceptional. Wyatt Kaiser's had a really strong season, but from the stud offensive defensemen who you were hoping have the upside to be real game breakers on the back end, and I know Artie's only 20, Rinzel and Korchinski are only 21 years old, but none of the three have had really sound seasons thus far, and I just don't feel like the development has gone as smoothly as we would have hoped for those crucial young pieces on the back end. So altogether, I feel like this Blackhawks blue line, it's getting a little bit messier and messier by the day. And just how they're handling Kevin Korchinski, it's foolish because, again, if they saw a scenario like this coming, they should have traded Korchinski a year ago because his trade value hasn't gotten any better throughout the course of this season. And I don't get why they won't play him because his trade value is already not very good right now. Like, I feel like the worst thing that could happen is he stinks and his trade value goes even further south. But if you were to trade Korchinski right now, you are already going to be selling low on him. So altogether, it's turned into a mess, Blackhawks fans. And for a kid who I was really high on because of his skating ability, like I said, just with each passing day, it becomes more and more unlikely that Korchinski is going to become a puzzle piece here in Chicago. And I recognize that some of that is his fault. He hasn't, absolutely flourished when he has gotten those opportunities, but I feel like there's a lot that goes into why he hasn't flourished in those situations. So let me know down in the comments section if you feel what I'm saying here, Blackhawks fans. If you're as frustrated as I am about Kevin Korchinski's usage, I just wish they would give the kid an opportunity because, again, I think we have a pretty good indication that he's not going to be a puzzle piece, but you never know until you give him a greater opportunity, and this should be the time to do it. Down the stretch of a season when the playoffs are out of reach, you want to see what you have in store with your young guys, especially someone like Korchinski who spent the last 2 years developing down in the AHL, and you drafted this kid 7th overall. Like, I feel like they've punted on him far too early and just have not handled him well whatsoever. So, hate to rant on the show here, Blackhawks fans, but that one really irked me yesterday. And I said, when previewing yesterday's episode, that I was going to lose it if that was the situation that unfolded. And of course, that was what unfolded. So let me know down in the comment section below if you feel the same way that I do about how the Blackhawks are handling Kevin Korchinski right now. Coming up in just a moment, before I close out today's episode, still want to get into all of the latest rumors around the Blackhawks' remaining trade chips. Just want to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. Segment 3, before I tie a bow on today's show and let you all go and get out of here, definitely wanted to get into some of the latest rumors, whispers, tidbits that we're hearing about Jason Dickinson, Ilya Mikheyev, and the rest of the Blackhawks trade chips. Now that there's under 48 hours to go until the trade deadline, and I'm looking at my phone right now just to make sure that during this recording, there wasn't a trade that's gone down. There hasn't. It's still only Connor Murphy, the only Blackhawk player that has been moved. But Frank Saravalli, I know a fan favorite for us Blackhawks fans right now. He joined the CHSN pregame show once again last night and did say that both Dickinson and Mikheyev, as expected, are garnering interest on the trade market. However, Saravalli did say he feels like there's a better chance that Mikheyev winds up getting traded than Dickinson just because of Mikheyev's versatility. He's someone you can kind of plug up and down the lineup, plays with a lot of speed, and obviously with the game getting faster and faster, that's only more and more important. Then obviously there's his penalty kill prowess as well. One of the best, if not the best, penalty killing forward in the entire NHL. While Jason Dickinson is an attractive asset as a third line center, there's just kind of a lot of teams that are floating third line centers out there on the market right now. So that particular position that market is a little bit saturated right now. There's a lot of options for other teams for that 3C spot. So that kind of takes some of the luster away from Jason Dickinson and could ultimately, if the Blackhawks don't wind up getting what they want to in return for Dickinson. Saravalli said it's not a foregone conclusion that he remains with the Blackhawks for the rest of the season. And he kind of said the same thing about Ilya Mikheyev as well. At the Blackhawks, don't just want to be selling these guys for the sake of selling them. And I do think that is smart by GMKD. They're not in a position where they have to trade either of these two. However, as I broke down on the show when previewing or projecting the Blackhawks end of season lineup, feels like they absolutely have to trade one of these two just from a numbers perspective to give all their young players that they would like to an opportunity over the final 20 games or so. And then Scott Powers of The Athletic, he also mentioned in a column this morning kind of the same thing that Saravalli did. However, Powers believes that Dickinson is the most likely player still with the Blackhawks to get traded before Friday's deadline. So we're going to have to wait and see on that front. In my opinion, I feel like Jason Dickinson is the one the Blackhawks want to trade because I feel like Ryan Green as the third line center or Oliver Moore in that 3C spot, that's what they want to be doing. And I'm guessing that with Green potentially moving down in the lineup into a 3C or 4C spot, that's where Anton Frondel is probably going to slot in as Connor Bedard's left winger for however many games he joins the Blackhawks for. So I feel like Dickinson is the one they probably want to trade more, but at the same point in time, I do feel like Ilya Mikheyev could have the higher trade value. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with both of those guys. It feels like it might not be a both getting dealt type of situation any longer, but things are still up in the air. There's obviously lots of time still to go, and I'm sure we'll hear more rumblings on both of these two guys, but thought that was interesting to hear from Sarah Volley and Scott Powers, some of those latest updates on those two. But again, feel pretty confident that at least one is going to get moved before 2 p.m. Central Time on Friday. As for Captain Nick Foligno and Matt Grzelcyk, still no real word on either of them. They, from what I heard, weren't mentioned by Sarah Volley last night. I didn't really see anything on them in the column that Scott Powers posted this morning. And to me, that again just tells me they're more likely to be sticking around than not. But as I said, if they do wind up keeping Grzelcyk, with Wyatt Kaiser's return right around the corner, the blue line is very clogged up, especially with Ethan Del Mastro now up in the NHL. One of he or Kevin Korchinski, at the very least, is going to be going back to Rockford should Matt Grzelcyk wind up not getting traded, which, as I mentioned, I feel like it's pretty likely that he's going to remain with the Blackhawks throughout the course of the season. And for Nick Foligno, just haven't really gotten any word of which direction he might be leaning. So to me, I feel like, while I know this is a big decision and one that I'm sure he's thinking about very hard with his family, I saw the Columbus Blue Jackets' Aaron Portzline of The Athletic mention that as a bold prediction for the Blackhawks at the trade deadline, that they would bring back Nick Foligno. And I feel like it would have to be, if Foligno were to get moved, it would have to be one of those. I feel like it would have to be going back to Columbus. I mean, yes, he could get traded to a team and go and make a run for a Stanley Cup championship, but knowing him and just like the family, wholesome guy that he is, I feel like a place like Columbus, maybe Boston, but I don't really see them being all that aggressive at this year's trade deadline. Like, those are the places to me where it would make sense for Nick Foligno to get traded to. Now, doesn't mean he won't consider other options, but altogether, I think it would have to be a really great opportunity for Nick Foligno to get dealt. And also, if Jason Dickinson winds up getting traded, we're assuming the Blackhawks are retaining half of his salary. Nick Foligno has a $4.5 million cap hit. There's not a lot of teams that can just go and plug that in, even with the increased salary cap this season. So again, for many different reasons, I think it's pretty darn likely that the captain remains with the C on his chest for the remainder of the 25-26 campaign. And I think Matt Grzelcyk is probably going to be remaining with the Blackhawks as well. All right, that is going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. If you're watching on YouTube right now, please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a major way in growing my platform. And be sure to also go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well. So that way you can tune into all of the latest episodes when you're on your way to work, on your way from work, during your lunch break, whatever it may be. And if you want to check me out on social media, you can basically find me anywhere at Jack Bushman 2, my Strictly Blackhawks account on X. That can be found at Talkin' Hockey to get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.